The President of the United States is a gangster, an enemy saboteur, and quite possibly an outright traitor to the Republic. His family business, as it has been for half a century, is organized crime. Specifically money laundering, influence peddling, and if the latest revelations are to be believed, and why wouldn't they be, actual honest-to-God, straight-up fucking bribery. Literally shaking down foreign governments for cash payments in return for U.S. policy concession. The offense that is so severe they actually listed it in Article 2 of the Constitution as an example of the sorts of high crimes and misdemeanors that would rise to the level of impeachable conduct for a president or a vice president. The other one they specifically listed, well, that was treason. And this is a case where, hell, do you even need to separate the two? I mean, if you're taking cash bribes from foreign governments, irrespective of what the money is being given in exchange for, it seems to me that's treasonable conduct by any conceivable definition of the term. But let's go back through the series of events, shall we? Because I don't think we do that nearly often enough. Joe Biden assumes office in January of 2021. Within 6 months, he has authored a botched, bungled, bumbling, thoroughly disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, in which he leaves behind at least $85 billion worth of weapons and ammo and vehicles and equipment, just for good measure, for which I am sure he received a very warm thank you card from the Taliban. Within 6 months after that, Joe Biden is suddenly all over the airwaves, seemingly out of the blue, announcing that Russia is about to invade Ukraine. And he keeps saying it, and he keeps saying it, and he keeps saying it. He even says things like, well, if it was just a tiny, small little incursion, we wouldn't mind all that much. And when that didn't work, he said, well, I don't think Putin's got any choice. He's got to invade. But we had the American president for 3 weeks straight doing what can only be described as goading the Russian president, practically daring him repeatedly to invade another country. And it did take quite a bit of goading, but eventually in February of last year, Putin finally honored Biden's request and sent his tanks rolling over his western border. Since then, you and I have spent something like $200+ billion financing this proxy war that Joe Biden was so desperate to instigate. The oversight of where all that money goes and whose hands it winds up in and what it's used for, well, that's been mostly non-existent. And there doesn't seem to be any timetable or any limiting factor on our financing of Joe Biden's proxy war, with Republicans and Democrats alike pounding their fists on the podium saying, we are in this thing for as long as it takes, baby. As long as what takes? Exactly. You're not even going to tell us what the it is that you want us to basically finance forever? Meanwhile, every soft, effeminate, douchebag world leader drops whatever he happens to be doing at the moment and hops the next flight to Kiev. Incidentally, fun side note, Joe Biden's been to Ukraine more times than he has been to Arizona. Each time there is an opportunity to have their photograph taken next to Ukrainian Michael Scott as he flexes his muscles in his sexy olive drab spandex t-shirt and makes his best angry face. The last photo he took with Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham, it looked like both of those dudes were about to swoon. Like this was almost more masculine energy than they could take, like they were staring into the sun without any eye protection but couldn't make themselves look away. Then Lindsey Graham went back to his hotel room and touched himself while fantasizing about killing Ruskies, just like he does every other goddamn night of his feeble, wretched life. But returning back to the main point, consider Joe Biden's pattern of behavior in his first year in office. A humiliating surrender in one war, the instigation of another war, and the creation of a massive open-ended black hole into which to dump unconscionable sums of U.S. taxpayer money with little or no oversight. Hanlon's razor tells us we should never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. And make no mistake, Joe Biden is a uniquely stupid man. 40 years ago, back when he was in the intellectual prime of his life, he was mainly known for being the dumbest guy in the Senate. And he earned that title fair and square, make no mistake. But this pattern of behavior, I simply cannot attribute it to stupidity, because I don't think any man, even a mentally enfeebled, dumbass idiot like Joseph Robin Biden Jr., could make a series of decisions that stupid when operating in good faith. But if a president and his family were hopelessly compromised by foreign criminal enterprises, if they owed certain favors to those criminals in exchange for past services and considerations, Well, when viewed through that lens, the inexplicable pattern of behavior, it starts making a whole hell of a lot more sense, don't you think? Now, at the start of Barack Obama's second term, Joe Biden, famously, was made the point man on U.S. policy in two countries, China and Ukraine, within a matter of weeks. Members of the Biden family began receiving large, mysterious cash payments from people inside those two countries in exchange for no apparent services rendered. If there's a non-corrupt explanation for that, I would very much like to hear it. You know what? I think I'm nowhere near finished with this rant. And yes, I don't normally self-apply that term, but this is most definitely a rant. Because there are times in life when a rant is perfectly well warranted, and this is one of those times. Jim Eagle, hit the fucking music. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where I came here tonight to do nothing but talk shit and chew bubblegum, and I'm just about out of bubblegum. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. American, all ships at sea. Welcome to the first ever Sunday edition of the program. I'm your eponymous host and humble servant. Did you ever notice how each time there's a really devastating news story that drops about Joe Biden and his corruption and his family entanglements, Donald Trump always gets indicted within the next 18 hours? That's a hell of a damned uncanny coincidence, don't you think? It certainly isn't any surprise that the fake news performance artists don't want to talk about the fact that our president is a gangster who runs a family organized crime syndicate and thinks it's fun to use the Department of Justice as a personal goon squad with which to crush his enemies. You know, since their relationship to his administration is much the same relation as the relationship between the fluffer and the leading man on the set of a gay porn film. Although, to be fair, the fluffer probably has more self-respect and a deeper sense of professional ethics than the fake news performance artists do. And gosh, if there are any fluffers out there who might have taken offense to being compared with CNN, you have my sincere apology. But we know all too well how this drill works by now. When the performance artists don't want to talk about a story because it reflects badly on their guy, they just spend the next 72 hours slandering Donald Trump while waiting for the thing to blow over. And think about how remarkable this would have seemed just 6 or 7 years ago. An FBI whistleblower reveals $5 million cash bribe payments being made to the president and his son, which is the most severe criminal allegation ever leveled at a president. And the people we used to call the press, well, they've got no interest in talking about it. Why? Because they own this guy. Joe Biden would not be the president today without the all-hands-on-deck effort by the fake news media to drag his bumbling ass across the finish line in 2020. And when you interfere in an election with the intent that a certain candidate wins, and he wins, well, your media organization basically becomes a government agency to all intents and purposes. For 2.5 years, they've been trying to portray the most corrupt, most incompetent, most philosophically incoherent administration in U.S. history as something other than what it is. And they've gone way the hell too far to turn back now. You can't really uncross that Rubicon after you've made the conscious choice to shill for the regime instead of doing journalism. But there's an interesting side effect of these media self-imposed embargoes on stories that look bad for Joe Biden. He winds up with nobody defending him except internet trolls. And they seem to have two main lines of defense, each of which is just about as hilarious as the other. The first line of defense says, you can't impeach the president for something he is alleged to have done when he was the vice president. Which, in a vacuum, that might be a valid point. But you know what makes it not a valid point? The fact that you guys fake impeached Donald Trump a mere 30 months ago after he had already left office. So good job with that rationale, guys. That sounds like a real winner. Not a shred of hypocrisy there. Totally not an internally self-defeating argument. Very solid stuff. And the second line of defense goes like this. Hey, just because Joe Biden's family members were receiving fat bags of cash from shadowy foreign sources to whom they hadn't furnished any goods or services, well, that doesn't mean Joe Biden personally did anything wrong. And frankly, this one is so funny it makes the first argument look positively airtight by comparison. But here's the thing. If the fake news performance artists were covering this story and running interference for the Bidens as they normally do, they wouldn't have any better arguments than the trolls do, because there just aren't any. In the Freedom Caucus wing of the Republican Party, there is a lot of talk about impeachment right now, from Marjorie Taylor Greene, among others. They want to impeach his ass. They want to impeach his ass right now. They see no good reason to wait. And then on the other side of that continuum, you've got the neoliberal Romney-McConnell wing of the party, where they wouldn't want to impeach Joe Biden no matter how damning the evidence against him was. So for all of the Republicans in between, they've got a question they need to be asking themselves. Do we want an impeachment that has an actual chance of resulting in a conviction in the Senate, or do we just want to do a week of dumbass impeachment theater that amounts to nothing? If you just want to do an amateur theatrical production and get yourself a bunch of face time on TV, then sure, go ahead and impeach the old bastard right now. But if you want there to be a chance of success, you need more evidence than you have right now. You need to go in there with a case that is so overwhelming, so irrefutable, that not even a Democrat senator can vote against removal without paying a heavy political price for it. You need 66 votes in a Senate that is evenly split. And the current evidence, damning though it is, it just won't get you there. If it takes throwing Chris Wray and Merrick Garland's ass both in jail to get your hands on the rest of the relevant documents that they're trying so hard to suppress, then throw their asses in jail. Don't be shy about it. They've earned it. And hell, if you're champing at the bit to impeach somebody right now, how about impeaching the enemy saboteur skin-suited reptilian space alien Alejandro Mayorkas for providing aid and comfort to the enemies of the United States, which he has been doing quite gleefully since the day he was installed in his current position with the votes of 16 Republican senators, whose names you can probably guess off the top of your head without any help from me. And yes, I know what some of you are thinking right now. But if you remove Biden from office, then we get President Kamala Harris. And you know what I say to that? Good. Let the people see. Let them see in full living color what end-stage affirmative action looks like. Let them see the inevitable end result when you spend 50 years prioritizing skin color and sex organs over competence and experience. Will it be ugly? Hell yes, it'll be ugly. Will it be worse than Biden? In all likelihood, yes it will. But if we haven't reached the nadir of presidential incompetence yet, we have to be very, very close to the bottom. I was thinking earlier today about the election of 1788, the first presidential election we ever had, under our system as it was then originally constituted. The first place finisher won the presidency, and the second place finisher became vice president. So we wound up that first time with General George Washington of Virginia and Ambassador John Adams of Massachusetts. Now, Washington, of course, was as universally beloved as it is possible for a man to be, and while Adams had no shortage of enemies, there was very little disagreement about the fact that those two men were the best two men the country had to offer. Fast forward 235 years, and we have fallen all the way from Washington and Adams to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Does anybody in the country, does anybody in the world think those two people are the best we have to offer? Does anybody think they are even in the top 10,000? No, of course nobody thinks that. Even Joe and Kamala themselves probably aren't dumb enough to believe something that stupid. But that is where we are now. We install some of the least exceptional, least talented people in some of the most critically important positions. Then the country goes to hell in a handbasket, and we all act surprised like we never saw it coming. Joe Biden puts a cross-dressing leather fetishist luggage thief in charge of nuclear waste disposal, and it's a surprise when he doesn't work out. Do you think anybody ever voted for George Washington because they liked his personality? No. They did not. John Adams, by most accounts, was one of the most insufferable assholes in the history of American politics. But do you think anybody ever voted against him because they thought he wasn't a nice enough guy? No, they did not. They voted on competence and experience because it is insane to vote any other way. But if you talk to current day voters, and this is by no means unique to one side or the other, you will hear a whole hell of a lot of, well, I like this guy better, and, well, he seems nice. and other such ridiculous platitudinal horse shit. We wind up with stupid leaders because we act like stupid voters. Is it tempting to chalk the whole thing up to industrialized vote fraud? Sure it is. And industrialized vote fraud absolutely does exist. If anybody disagrees with that statement, I would invite them to provide any non-corrupt explanation. For a dude shoving 200 mail ballots into a strip mall drop box in the middle of the night. You know where the comments are. Can't wait to hear it. Am I saying that changed the result of the election? No, I am not, because there's no evidence that it did. Saying voter fraud exists and is fairly widespread is not the same thing as saying voter fraud changed the result of an election. Do I think that is a possibility? Well, sure I do. Because why commit vote fraud in the first place if you're not trying to artificially influence the outcome of the election? If we had a functioning news media, they would have spent the last 2+ years investigating what would be one of the biggest news stories in U.S. history. But alas, we don't have a functioning news media. We have a Joe Biden fluffery and transcription service. So if the outcome of the 2020 election was down to industrialized vote fraud, we will have to unearth the evidence of it for ourselves in order to substantiate that conclusion. But if you look me in the eye and say 2020 was the most secure election in history, I will laugh directly in your face for a good long while, because it wasn't, and because you richly deserve to be laughed at. What you really mean to say is, my guy won, so I love this election, it is perfect, stop asking questions. And some of the reactions to the Trump indictment are equally precious, frankly, especially in light of the fact that, number one, the Presidential Records Act is not a criminal statute, and number two, the Espionage Act requires conscious criminal malfeasance with the intent to harm the United States or its allies or its interests. I was having an argument this morning with some guy in some comment thread who gave this very long, very torturous explanation about how Trump retaining these documents is such a grievous assault upon our national security that it becomes a violation of the Espionage Act. I wrote back asking if he realized that according to the standard that he just laid out, every president with a presidential library is a foreign spy and should go to prison for 400 years. I was eagerly awaiting his response, but he decided to go a different route by mass deleting all of his comments in the thread and then disappearing without a trace. As debating strategies go, I have seen better, frankly. And since we are still in Pride Month, here is today's Pride Month update. President Joe Biden says you are a sick, evil weirdo if you don't trans your kids. The president who took inappropriate showers with his daughter, who enjoys seizing preteen girls by the shoulders and whispering, "No serious guys until you're 30, in their ears while furiously sniffing their hair as they struggle to escape from his clutches, who has less moral authority to wield than any president in history. Well, he thinks you're a real sicko if you don't castrate your teenage son." But then what else would we expect from a man who is a gangster and a traitor? Also, if you wind up on an FBI domestic terrorism watch list for clicking on this video, I do apologize in advance. Thank you very much indeed for watching. I will see you next time. Do not comply. Have a pleasant tomorrow. Get off my lawn!